Hi everyone, it's Lindsay, and I want to share with you how to do a little stamping on Kraft, but really make this bright and intense. So I am starting out with a scalloped rectangle die cut, and I'm using a circle die just as a stencil here. So I've got my pencil ready to go, and I'm going to go ahead and do a nice little circle outline just right in the center of this Kraft panel that I've cut. You do want to use a nice light hand here because more than likely you're not going to be able to go back and really erase these pencil lines. So just make sure you use a light hand. Now I'm going to be using the Love Sentiment stamp set for my wreath that I'm making here. And I've also got some white pigment ink. Now this is a messy ink. I don't use it a lot, but it's not something that you can substitute out with any other ink. It has properties that are all its own. So I'm going to be using it today, and I'm going to be using those very small little images that you get with the Love Sentiment stamp set. So for my stamping, I will be using the 3-leaf stamp, the single leaf stamp, as well as the flower stamp. So I'm going to start off with my flower stamp, and I want to put 5 of these on my paper. So I'm going to stamp one first at the top, then I'll stamp one on both sides, and also 2 at the bottom. Now whenever you're inking up with your pigment ink, you want to go ahead and look at it before you stamp it down just to make sure you have a nice even coating of ink. Now whenever you stamp this on your craft paper, it's going to look a bit like a hot mess. It doesn't stamp perfectly. It has a little bit of a harsher edge around it with a little bit of a softer center, and you do want to make sure that you have a nice bright white pigment ink. There are different colors. I'm using Rangers here. I highly suggest it, but Hero Arts makes a nice one. I believe Lawn Fawn makes a nice one as well. You just need to play around with different formulas. So after I got my 5 flowers stamped down, I'm going to go ahead and move on to my little 3-leaf image here. Now in between each of these flowers, I'm going to go ahead and stamp 2 of these. So I've got one. They're both going to be facing away from the flowers. So here you can see I am angling this towards the next flower, and then I'll flip it over and do the same thing as it's coming away from that flower. So I'm just making a wreath image here, and I'm following that circle that I had stenciled on beforehand. Now as I'm stamping this, it's not going to be completely right on that circle pencil line that I made. But that's okay because I'm going to go back in and fix this. You can see my circle is starting to look a little bit wonky. It looks a little flat on top, but I promise that will all be fixed. Now I'm going to come in with this small little single leaf stamp, and this is where I'm going to fix everything and really even out all the sides. So anywhere where I feel like it needs a little something extra or it needs to be evened out and just create a really nice circle, I'm going to go ahead and stamp one of these. Now I will be using 2 different colors of ink for these stamps when I start actually stamping with my colored ink, so you don't really need to worry about it being too much green because I'm going to use a few different colors here, so it will be nice and even once I get this all stamped out. So I'm going to speed this up a little bit as I start filling in these smaller leaf stamps because I do stamp quite a few of these. You can see that as I work my way around the circle, it's really starting to even itself out as I fill in these little divots and all these little pockets that were left open. Now if you feel like something might need stamped here, or you just feel like maybe it doesn't need it, you can go ahead and wait on that, and after you get the entire wreath finished, if you want to come back in and add a few little things, you can always do that. So before I moved on to my colored ink, I did heat set this white ink with my heat tool. It does take a very long time to dry unless you use your heat tool, so you do want to go ahead and do that, either that or let it dry overnight. So I'm using a nice hot pink dye ink here, and I am just inking up my flower stamp and stamping right over those pigment stamps that I had stamped out. Now you can offset this a little bit. Some of these I'm stamping right on top, some of them I am offsetting a little bit. It just depends on how it kind of stamps out. But you can see as I stamp over this white pigment ink, it allows that dye ink to sit on top of the pigment ink so it doesn't soak into the paper as much and it doesn't dull the color. It really intensifies it and brightens it up. So I'm using a leaf green ink here for my 3-leaf stamp, and again I am just inking this up and stamping right over those white stamps that I had already stamped down. Now even though I heat set this, some of them didn't get quite dry, so just check your stamp before you go back into your dye ink pad just to make sure you don't have any transfer of white pigment ink to your dye ink pad. You don't want to ruin it. So I will just continue stamping these right over each one of those little white stamps that I had created, and then I'll move on to my single leaf. Now for my single leaf, I used a chartreuse color, which is just a little bit of a more brown toned. It's got a brown undertone to it. So I will go ahead and stamp those all over my single leaves that I stamped. Now this is going to help it kind of stand out and not look so flat, just like one solid green with some pink thrown in. It's going to give it a more realistic and more depth to the wreath. So as I ink this up, I'm just bringing it over and stamping right on top of that. I'm not putting much thought into which leaves that I stamp directly over and which leaves I offset a little bit, because once I put too much thought in it, then things start to go wrong. So I just stamp and keep going. Now here you can see I wasn't loving the way this looked. I felt like it needed just a few more little leaves on there, so I came back in with my white pigment ink, and then I'm just going to stamp right over that. Now that to me looked more balanced, and you can always go back in and add more. You just can't take away. So just remember that. Whenever I chose the circle that I wanted to use for my wreath, I knew that I wanted my blessed sentiment to fit right in the center of that. So I chose a die that I knew would fit this certain sentiment. Now I just went ahead and put my blessed right in the center of that wreath that I created, and I put 2 little sentiments on top of the wreath and also on the bottom. Now you do want to use your embossing bag here, and you really want to make sure that you heat set this panel before you start to heat emboss on it. If this is wet at all with that pigment ink, your embossing ink is going to stick everywhere. So just make sure you let it dry overnight, or you use your heat tool, and also just prep it with your embossing bag just to cut down on stray powders. So I inked those stamps up with my Versamark ink, and then I'm going to go ahead and stamp them down with my Misty. Now I am using the Princess Gold embossing powder from Ranger to do my heat embossing, and I am just sprinkling this over those sentiments and trying to keep as much powder away from that wreath as possible. You can see I still had a little bit of powder sticking to certain areas, even though I did heat set this with my heat tool. So I'm going to come back in with a paintbrush, and I'm just going to brush away any powder that's stuck anywhere I don't want it. It brushes away very easily, and it does take a little bit extra time, but it's just something that's going to happen with your pigment inks. But once I had all of that stray powder brushed away, I went ahead and heat set it, and then I'm just going to put this card together. So I cut a rectangle from some light purple cardstock that was bigger than my scalloped rectangle, and I'm going to mount that scalloped rectangle right onto it with some fun foam and double-sided adhesive. Now I already have double-sided adhesive on the back of this purple rectangle, so I'll just peel that backing paper off and mount this right onto an A2 top folding white card base to finish off this card. I'd put so much time into that wreath, I really wanted to keep my main focus on it, so I didn't add any extra embellishments to this card. I hope you guys enjoyed this video tutorial, and as always, I will leave you with this close-up and a few pictures of the finished card. For more information and the supply list, you can head to my blog, as well as the Inspired by Stamping blog. I will leave both links in the description box below. Thank you guys so much for watching today, and happy crafting!